Hey guys, tonight we step into the rolling hills of Boeotia, the land where the sun slants golden across wild vines and the air smells faintly of earth, grapes, and mischief. You trudge along dusty paths, your sandals crunching over stones, and immediately notice the hum of something ancient stirring through the air. Somewhere up ahead, Dionysus himself is already striding between tangled greenery, his robes fluttering and his expression one part divine serenity, one part someone who just realized pruning is way harder than it looks. You probably won't survive this without at least a mild sense of awe or an accidental grape stain on your shirt. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always fun to see who's watching a god try to run a vineyard. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let us ease into tonight's journey together. You start close to the lower slopes, where wild grapes hang heavy on thorny tendrils, their skins mottled with the violet and green of ripening seasons. Dionysus leans over a particularly stubborn vine and mutters something that sounds suspiciously like encouragement mixed with a threat. "We'll tame you yet," he says. You watch, realizing that taming grapes is a serious business in his mind, and even a god can't just summon perfect fruit without a little elbow grease, or in this case, divine persuasion. Historians still argue whether Greek gods were ever imagined as laboring like mortals or if this was purely a poetic conceit, but here, in Boeotia, the theory takes on a vivid, almost tactile reality. As you follow him, the landscape unfolds. Low hills give way to a patchwork of sunlit clearings and shadowed groves. The soil smells faintly of loam and something sweeter, the unmistakable scent of fermenting potential. Dionysus crouches to examine a vine root, tracing it with a long finger, muttering about hydration, soil pH, and whether the local satyrs have been meddling again. You glance down and see a small cluster of grapes, bruised and dusted with a thin layer of morning dew, and feel the bizarre thrill of witnessing someone or something arguably immortal debate over which grapes are worthy. A fringe tale floats through your mind. Some ancient writers whispered that Dionysus invented wine while chasing satyrs through the hills, and that the very first vineyard was a chaotic playground rather than a methodical plot. You can almost see it. Vines twisted into impossible knots, a satyr attempting to stomp grapes in protest, and Dionysus darting between them, half exasperated, half ecstatic. And yet, there's method hidden in the madness. Every now and then, he stops, tilts his head toward the sun, and touches a leaf as though reading its thoughts. You step carefully over roots, listening to the soft rustle of wind in the branches. Occasionally, Dionysus pauses dramatically, holding a grape aloft like it's a gem stolen from Olympus itself. He tastes it, frowns, and mutters something that makes you squint, because you can't tell if he's criticizing the fruit or your presence. Somehow, the air around him feels charged, not with lightning, but with the slow, deliberate energy of someone utterly absorbed. Nearby, a shepherd appears, eyes wide, staff clutched in hand, watching this god-turned vineyard enthusiast like he's stumbled into a fever dream. Dionysus gestures grandly, inviting him over to participate in divine viticulture. The shepherd hesitates, stepping carefully over roots and tiny mushrooms, and you notice a faint smirk. Even mortals seem to realize that volunteering for a god's vineyard is equal parts honor and probable chaos. You pause beside a low hill and breathe in. The sun is warm, the scent of earth and grapes is soothing, and you can almost feel history pressing in. Ancient Boeotians would have seen this land differently, perhaps sacred, perhaps just practical, but here, walking in the footsteps of Dionysus, it becomes a liminal space, part reality, part myth, entirely intoxicating. He gestures toward a row of vines and declares, with theatrical flair, that this section shall produce the wine that will make mortals forget their troubles and maybe step on a few as well. You chuckle quietly because the notion is at once absurd and oddly comforting. A god, after all, worrying over grapes and harvest schedules like a stressed manager at a startup. You notice that even in his divine presence, mistakes occur. A vine leans too far, a branch snaps, and a small flurry of leaves dusts your shoulder. Dionysus sighs dramatically, muttering something about the fickle nature of mortality, and you realize he's practicing patience as much as pruning. This is an instructive moment. Even deities wrestle with the mundane, and maybe that's why humans keep imagining them so we can watch, safely distant, as they navigate paperwork, irrigation, and grape temper tantrums. Then comes a small, almost imperceptible detail. A group of ants is marching determinedly across a fallen grape, carrying it like treasure. Dionysus notices, tilts his head, and murmurs, "Even the smallest subjects deserve their place in the harvest." It's a quirky, fringe reminder that in mythology, small creatures sometimes carry cosmic significance, and for a moment, you think about how every part of this vineyard is alive, insisting on attention. Historians still argue whether such attention to minutiae in myth was symbolic, ritualistic, or just a storyteller's whim, but right now, you are witnessing it unfold in real time, or at least as close to real time as a narrative involving gods can feel. The sun climbs higher, and your feet are dusty, your arms lightly scraped by thorns, but your senses are alive. You can taste the morning air, faintly sweet and metallic with dew. Dionysus stands atop a small rise, surveying the land, and you notice the unmistakable glint of satisfaction in his eyes. Even if the vines themselves are chaotic, the vineyard feels like a promise, a place where labor, divinity, and the slow magic of nature intersect. You trudge on, mindful of loose stones, and notice that a distant brook winds its way lazily through the hills. Dionysus gestures toward it, explaining how water quality will affect the ferment, how sun exposure will determine sugar content, and even, in a moment of quiet, how poetry should accompany pruning. You chuckle, thinking about the absurdity of this instruction, and wonder if satyrs were assigned the role of quality control or simply general mischief. By mid-morning, the vineyard opens fully before you, wild and radiant. Dionysus, still moving among the vines with purpose and panache, reminds you that every grape, every leaf, and every careless shepherd step contributes to the grand experiment. You pause, taking a deep breath, and realize that the first section of this godly vineyard journey is as much about observation, patience, and awe as it is about fruit. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you note the lesson creeping in: even gods must negotiate with the messy, stubborn, unpredictable elements of the earth. You follow Dionysus deeper into the vineyard, where the tangled vines start to feel like a miniature forest. Each step presses you into soft soil, and the leaves rustle above, catching glints of sunlight in unpredictable ways. He crouches beside a particularly stubborn grape cluster, tapping gently with long fingers, as if trying to reason with it. "You need balance," he mutters, "water, sunlight, and fear in equal measure. You raise an eyebrow. Fear of a grape, but somehow, you already know that this vineyard is less about biology and more about theatrics and perhaps a touch of divine eccentricity. Pruning, you quickly realize, is a lesson in patience and humility. You try to mimic Dionysus, snipping off a rogue branch, only for it to snap in a way that sprays dust and leaves across your face. He chuckles softly, a sound like wind through chimes. Patience, he says again, not unkindly. The idea that a god would need to repeat patience like a mantra strikes you as oddly comforting. Even immortals wrestle with the stubbornness of living things. Historians still argue whether the Greeks truly envisioned their gods performing labor, or if tales of Dionysus in vineyards were simply allegories for the careful nurturing of wine culture. Right now, though, metaphor and reality feel almost indistinguishable. As you move along, you notice the vineyard is alive in unexpected ways. Tiny flowers bloom at the vine roots, releasing a scent so faint it almost feels imagined. A beetle crawls along a leaf, its shell catching the sun like a polished gem. Dionysus stoops, watching the insect, and murmurs, "Even the smallest presence affects the whole." It's a fringe detail, something more poetic than practical, yet it underscores the meticulous attention he gives to everything around him. You wonder if this is an early lesson in ecological thinking or just Dionysus indulging in theatrics while pruning. By mid-morning, you reach a section of the vineyard where the vines twist into nearly impenetrable tangles. Dionysus steps carefully, occasionally whispering encouragement or mild threats. "Straighten, my beauties," he commands, though whether the vines obey or not is left to your imagination. You remember the shepherd from earlier, standing nervously at the edge, unsure whether to help or flee. He eventually tries to prune a vine and ends up more entangled than the plant itself. Dionysus sighs, a mix of amusement and exasperation. It's clear he has expectations, high ones, but no clear instructions on execution, and you realize that's part of the lesson, cultivating patience in yourself as much as in the grapes. The sun climbs higher, and Dionysus pauses to examine a cluster of grapes that glisten in the morning light. He plucks one, rolls it between his fingers, and then bites, chewing thoughtfully. "Not yet," he declares, and you notice the tiny twitch of a frown. It's as if he's tasting not just sugar but potential, the intangible promise of wine to come. Quirky as it seems, ancient texts hint that Dionysus was believed to sense the quality of fruit in ways beyond human perception, almost a supernatural palate. Scholars still debate whether this was symbolic exaggeration or a reflection of genuine viticultural knowledge in ritual practice. Watching him now, it feels almost plausible. You move to another row, noticing that some vines are unusually vigorous, leaves broader than others, grapes clustering densely. Dionysus kneels, brushing soil from the roots, whispering encouragement to the plant. He seems almost parental, a far cry from the reveler and mischief maker the myths often emphasize. You can't help but smirk, the god of wine, partying, and chaos, carefully instructing a grapevine on optimal growth conditions. It's absurd, yet strangely calming. A fringe tale crosses your mind. One story claims that Dionysus once lectured a vine for slacking off in sunlight exposure, and that vine supposedly grew sweeter for it. You glance at the plants now, half expecting them to respond, but they only sway lazily in the breeze. Still, it's a reminder that myth and viticulture often intertwine in ways both practical and poetic. As you continue, you notice Dionysus employing unusual methods to ensure vine health. He hums softly, almost chanting, his hands hovering over leaves as if transmitting some invisible energy. Occasionally, he twirls around, gesturing to the sky, perhaps appealing to the sun. It's theatrical, certainly, but also strangely methodical. You wonder whether these were genuine agricultural techniques, lost to time and misinterpreted as ritual, or simply the god's own eccentric improvisation. The morning stretches on. Bees flit between flowers, their buzzing a soft backdrop to Dionysus' murmured instructions. You accidentally brush against a vine and feel the sticky sweetness of early grape sap on your fingers. Dionysus notices, shakes his head, and mutters, "Humans, always interfering." Yet he smiles, and you realize the lesson here isn't just about grapes, it's about observation, patience, and reverence for the process. Even immortals need reminders. Later, you reach a section where the earth dips, forming a natural terrace. Dionysus kneels to inspect the soil, rubbing it between his fingers. "Moisture is everything," he says, glancing at you. "Too dry, and the grapes shrivel. Too wet, and they rot. Balance is key." You nod, secretly wishing the same wisdom applied to your own life. Fringe scholars note that ancient Greek viticulture involved terraces precisely for drainage and sun exposure, and here, the god seems instinctively aware of every nuance. By midday, you're sweaty and dust-covered, yet strangely invigorated. The vineyard feels alive, a complex network of life that requires constant attention. Dionysus gestures broadly, encompassing rows of vines, the distant hills, and the occasional grazing animal. "All of this," he says, voice softening, "demands respect, patience, and a bit of whimsy." You laugh quietly to yourself because whimsy, it seems, is mandatory in divine agriculture. As the sun tilts toward noon, Dionysus pauses atop a small rise, surveying the vineyard. You notice how the light glints off leaves and grapes, casting patterns that seem almost deliberate, like a painter arranging colors for maximum effect. He breathes in deeply, savoring the smell of soil, leaves, and nascent fruit. "Yes," he murmurs, "this will do," though you suspect he says this far more for the theatrical effect than absolute certainty. Historians still argue whether these descriptions of divine observation reflect literal practices or allegorical storytelling meant to elevate winemaking into sacred art. Right now, it doesn't matter, the vineyard feels sacred. A small, unexpected touch adds humor to the morning. A goat wanders in, eager to taste a vine's lower leaves. Dionysus sighs, pinches the air between his fingers, and mutters something about mortals needing training, but you can't help laughing. Even a god's vineyard can't escape the chaos of animals, or perhaps that chaos is precisely why the vineyard feels alive. By the time you reach the far end of the lower slopes, you've absorbed hours of subtle instruction. You've seen patience tested, senses heightened, and even a god humbled by the capriciousness of vines. You realize, slowly, that viticulture under Dionysus is less about control and more about attentiveness, creativity, and an acceptance that nature resists perfect order. Awaiting continue. By mid-afternoon, you notice a shift in the vineyard's rhythm. Dionysus has decided that mortal help is necessary, though the concept of help here is loose at best. You follow as he beckons the shepherds and farmers to join, their expressions oscillating between awe, confusion, and mild terror. One older man mutters under his breath about gods having poor taste in vineyard assistants, while a younger shepherd practically vibrates with excitement, eager to participate in a divine experiment. Dionysus claps his hands, a gesture that echoes across the hills, and declares, "We shall work together, but know this, enthusiasm and fear are equally required." You watch, half amused, half bewildered, as he wanders among them, demonstrating pruning techniques that involve dramatic arm sweeps and occasional interpretive gestures toward the sun. You follow him closely, tripping occasionally over stray roots, while he explains the delicate balance between vine structure, sunlight exposure, and the life energy he insists flows through each grape. Fringe tales suggest that Dionysus could literally sense the mood of a vine, a sort of vine empathy, though scholars still argue whether these are poetic inventions or practical viticultural knowledge encoded in myth. Either way, watching him pause beside a vine and sigh as if the leaves had offended him personally makes you reconsider the emotional weight of horticulture. The mortals attempt to mimic his movements, snipping, twisting, and tugging at vines, while goats wander in for snacks, and the occasional satyr lurks in the shadows, critiquing leaf alignment or grape size with what seems like unjustified confidence. You can't help but chuckle when one satyr leans over a row of grapes and declares, "These are too cheerful. They need melancholy," and Dionysus nods seriously, almost as if taking notes. It's moments like these that make you question the line between performance, ritual, and actual agriculture. You trudge down a narrow path as Dionysus gathers the farmers for a short lesson on grape clusters. He plucks one, twirls it theatrically, and murmurs, "Observe the symmetry, the sheen, the promise within." A young woman farmer rolls her eyes in polite confusion, while the older man scratches his beard, muttering about too much poetry and not enough pruning. It's a scene that perfectly captures the goddess' dual personality, whimsical, obsessive, and impossibly exacting. Historians still debate whether these poetic flourishes reflect real practices among early Greek vineyard cults or are later embellishments meant to elevate winemaking to divine art. Suddenly, one of the shepherds accidentally steps on a grape cluster, sending purple juice squelching underfoot. Dionysus freezes mid-gesture, horror etched on his face, and then slowly turns to lecture the offending mortal on respect, care, and the sanctity of fruit. You suppress a laugh as the shepherd bows, mumbling apologies that blend embarrassment with bemusement. Fringe accounts suggest that Dionysus was notorious for holding grudges over minor vineyard accidents, which could be why Greek viticulture sometimes involved small ceremonial offerings to appease him. The afternoon sun warms your back as Dionysus walks among the mortal helpers, correcting their pruning angles, adjusting water schedules, and occasionally tossing an encouraging word like a confetti shower. You notice how his attention to detail borders on obsessive. Each vine must be inspected, each grape cluster tasted, and each leaf acknowledged. The absurdity is palpable, yet there's method to it, a subtle lesson in patience, observation, and relentless care. You realize the goddess' involvement transforms mundane work into a kind of theater, where each movement carries meaning and consequence. A satyr criticizes the spacing between vines, pointing out that symmetry is off by a few centimeters. Dionysus debates him seriously for several minutes, gesturing dramatically, while you trudge along behind them, wondering whether you've stepped into a vineyard or a theater of absurd precision. It's these little moments that make the day feel both chaotic and strangely instructive. You begin to sense that Dionysus' approach isn't merely divine whimsy, it's a form of education for mortals, teaching them not only how to care for grapes but also how to engage with nature attentively, creatively, and, occasionally, theatrically. You trudge up a gentle slope where the vines are particularly dense. Dionysus stops, tapping a cluster of grapes with one long finger. "Perfect balance," he says, "but notice the shadows here. They tell you more than I ever could." You bend closer, squinting at the interplay of light and leaf, and realize that he's teaching observational skills as much as viticulture. Fringe scholars suggest that such attention to microclimates and sunlight patterns might have inspired early Greek agricultural techniques, though others insist the emphasis was primarily symbolic. As the day stretches on, the mortals gradually adapt to his rhythm. Their movements become more confident, more deliberate, even as the occasional mishap, a trampled grape, a broken branch, or a startled goat, reminds everyone that chaos is never far from Dionysus' vineyard. You notice that the god himself seems to derive satisfaction not from perfection but from engagement, the willingness of mortals to immerse themselves fully, to learn and participate. You pause near a sunlit clearing where Dionysus demonstrates a peculiar technique. He hums while pruning, a soft, melodic chant that seems to encourage the vines to grow in certain directions. You tilt your head, uncertain whether it's superstition, performance, or perhaps an actual influence on growth. Ancient texts hint at musical or spoken accompaniment in some agricultural rites, though historians still argue whether these were effective or purely ceremonial. You can't help but be charmed by the spectacle, the god of wine instructing mortals and whispering to plants in perfect harmony. By late afternoon, the sun begins to dip, casting long shadows across the vineyard. Dionysus gathers everyone to survey the progress. The vines have been pruned, paths cleared, and a tentative sense of order restored. He nods, satisfied, and declares that today's lessons are sufficient, though he mutters something about tomorrow's trials in a tone that makes you shudder in anticipation. You trudge along, dusty, tired, and yet oddly exhilarated, realizing that mortal assistance is as much about learning the rhythm of the vineyard as it is about labor. You glance back over the rows, imagining how these moments will linger in memory: goats munching leaves, satyrs critiquing symmetry, humans stumbling and laughing under the gaze of a meticulous god. And somewhere in the midst of it all, you understand a fundamental lesson: divine power doesn't eliminate effort, it amplifies the stakes, the drama, and the unexpected lessons hidden in each cluster of grapes. Evening creeps into the vineyard, casting long, warm shadows across the rows of vines, and you trudge carefully, mindful of loose roots and the occasional grape hiding underfoot. Dionysus, ever restless, is still moving among the plants, muttering half-poetic instructions, half-exasperated complaints about the day's minor mishaps. A branch snaps under the weight of an overripe grape cluster, and he flinches dramatically, as if struck, before shaking his head and murmuring something about the perils of mortal negligence. You can't help but smile. This is chaos management on a godly scale, complete with flair and a touch of absurdity. The first calamity of the evening comes swiftly. A small goat, emboldened by curiosity and perhaps the lingering scent of Dionysus' earlier grape-tasting exercises, leaps into a vine row and begins nibbling leaves. Dionysus spins around, arms flailing, and yells, "Respect the vines! They are not mere salad." The goat bleats innocently, as if mocking his divine authority, while the mortals try to shoo it away without tripping over each other. Fringe accounts suggest that mischievous animals often appear in mythic vineyards as symbols of unpredictability, and you suddenly understand the metaphor in living, tangible terms. Historians still debate whether these tales are allegorical warnings or echoes of real agricultural challenges. You carefully step around a fallen branch and notice a pile of bruised grapes from earlier in the day, now beginning to ferment in the warm evening air. Dionysus kneels beside them, inspecting the developing aroma with a connoisseur's intensity. "Yes, transformation begins," he murmurs, eyes half closed in rapture. It's a moment that feels both magical and utterly mundane, a reminder that even divine experimentation involves waiting, observation, and occasional mess. You sniff cautiously, catching the sweet tang of early fermentation, and think about how the first human vintners must have marveled at the sudden, potent transformation of simple fruit into intoxicating liquid. Disaster, of course, is never far behind. A sudden gust of wind sweeps down the hill, knocking over a small trellis and sending a tangle of vines sprawling. Dionysus swears softly in a mixture of amusement and irritation, muttering about the treachery of nature. You dash forward to help, but your own foot catches a vine, sending you stumbling into a patch of soft soil. The mortals laugh, sheepishly at first, then wholeheartedly, and even the goat from earlier joins the chaos, darting between legs and grazing obliviously. You realize that vineyard management under Dionysus is part theater, part athletic challenge, and wholly unpredictable. He turns to you and waves a hand toward the chaos. "Fear not," he says, voice calm now, "for the true essence of wine is born from calamity." You blink. The idea that disasters might be integral to divine winemaking is both comforting and terrifying. Fringe scholars sometimes interpret this as a symbolic acknowledgement of the uncontrollable forces in agriculture, the whims of weather, pests, and human error, but seeing it firsthand, you feel the truth in it. As twilight deepens, you witness another unexpected event. One vine seems to have grown oddly fast, twisting around a neighboring trellis in a way that almost looks intentional. Dionysus steps closer, eyes narrowed, whispering as though coaxing it into the correct posture. "Grow wisely, little one," he says, and you pause, struck by the intimacy of the moment. Ancient texts hint that vine manipulation, trellising, and pruning were often ritualized in ways that bordered on theatrical, yet here it seems instinctual and personal, a blend of science, superstition, and care. A sudden, mischievous idea strikes the satyrs lurking near the edge of the vineyard. They begin rolling overripe grapes down the slope, creating small purple avalanches that splash across leaves, soil, and the occasional unsuspecting mortal. Dionysus throws his hands into the air in mock exasperation. "Chaos," he declares dramatically. "Necessary, yes, but not in my newly pruned rows." You duck behind a trellis, laughing quietly, as a wave of grape juice narrowly misses your sandal. It's moments like these that make the vineyard feel alive, unpredictable, and fully integrated into the mythic narrative of winemaking. You pause to catch your breath, noticing the sky turning shades of violet and orange. The scent of crushed grapes mixes with soil, leaves, and the faint perfume of wild flowers hidden among the rows. Dionysus, finally still for a moment, gestures toward the horizon. "This is the theater of transformation," he says softly, voice barely audible over the gentle rustle of leaves. "Every mishap, every unexpected gust, every curious goat contributes to the soul of the wine." You nod, understanding that the vineyard, in all its chaotic glory, is both a laboratory and a performance space, a place where divine experimentation and earthly unpredictability collide. Night approaches, and with it, the vineyard takes on an almost mystical quality. Fireflies flicker lazily among the leaves, their light reflecting off dewy grapes. Dionysus moves slowly, almost reverently, inspecting vines one last time, whispering to the plants as if imparting final instructions for the night. You notice the mortals, tired and dusty, leaning on their tools, exchanging stories and laughter, a sense of camaraderie forming in the shared experience of divine chaos. Fringe traditions suggest that such nighttime rituals, humming, and gentle care might have been considered sacred, reinforcing the spiritual connection between humans, nature, and godly influence. Finally, as darkness settles, Dionysus gathers everyone near the center of the vineyard. He raises a hand and pronounces the day's efforts sufficient, though he glances around with a sly smile that promises tomorrow will bring new trials. The mortals nod, some relieved, some exhilarated, having survived both literal and metaphorical avalanches of grapes, goat interventions, and divine perfectionism. You step back, brushing soil from your clothes, and realize that this day has been a lesson not only in viticulture but in patience, observation, humor, and the delicate art of managing both chaos and ambition. Dionysus' vineyard adventure reaches its first chaotic crescendo with the wine festival, and you trudge along toward the central clearing where preparations are underway. You can already hear the faint hum of lyres, the rhythmic pounding of small drums, and the excited chatter of mortals who have survived the day's pruning, goat attacks, and rogue grape avalanches. Dionysus strides ahead, arms wide, as if announcing that the very air is now infused with celebration. Music, merriment, and sampling, he declares, voice rolling with divine authority, though there's a twinkle in his eye that suggests sampling may not mean what you think. You trudge through a row of vines toward a wooden platform adorned with garlands of grape leaves, where mortals and satyrs alike are gathered. The first taste of fermented grape juice is passed around in rough-hewn cups. You sip carefully, noting the tang of early fermentation, the hint of wild earth, and something almost indefinable, a whisper of chaos distilled into liquid form. Fringe traditions suggest that the earliest Greek wine festivals doubled as informal experiments in fermentation techniques, though historians still argue whether these events were sacred rituals or social entertainment. Right now, it's a little of both. Dionysus moves among the celebrants with a dramatic flair, demonstrating to the mortals the proper way to toast. He lifts his cup skyward, swirls it, inhales deeply, and intones, to life, to chaos, to grapes that dare defy expectation. You notice a few mortals attempting to imitate him, their gestures awkward but heartfelt. A satyr rolls an eye and mutters under its breath, while Dionysus frowns, adjusting an imaginary imperfection in the ceremony. You can't help but laugh, even divine pageantry seems punctuated by petty perfectionism. Music swells as a young shepherd begins strumming a lyre, though a goat nearby attempts to mimic the melody by bleating along. Dionysus claps in rhythm, his robes twirling as he dances a slow, exaggerated step between the rows of grapes. You stumble slightly, trying to follow, and the mortals around you giggle, creating a strange but warm sense of community. Fringe sources hint that such festivals were intended to train mortals in rhythm, harmony, and the joyful chaos of winemaking, though some scholars argue that the revelry is purely literary embellishment. As you move through the crowd, you notice Dionysus taking a serious turn, gathering a group of farmers and pointing out clusters of grapes, explaining their sweetness, their density, and the subtle nuances that distinguish one vine from another. "Observe," he says softly, "for the wine will inherit not just the grape, but the care, the laughter, and the missteps along the way." You nod, tasting the truth in his words even as you try not to spill the slightly over-fermented wine in your cup. It's part education, part ceremony, and wholly unforgettable. Suddenly, an overzealous satyr decides to demonstrate a technique for vine-enhanced dance, resulting in a flurry of twirling that knocks over a few cups and sends droplets of juice flying. Dionysus throws up his hands dramatically, eyes wide, then pauses, tilting his head as if reconsidering the chaos. "Necessary improvisation," he murmurs, voice calm again. You laugh quietly, recognizing the pattern. Festival equals structured chaos, but structured by a god who delights in surprise. Food arrives, simple fare, bread, cheese, olives, and, of course, fresh grapes. You nibble slowly, noting how the flavors salty, sweet, and slightly tart interact with the wine. Dionysus wanders among the tables, encouraging sampling and conversation, his presence turning every bite into a divine taste test. Fringe tales suggest that early Greek wine festivals may have included informal competitions in pairing food and drink, though historians still debate how seriously these pairings were taken. Watching him, you understand that the performance itself is as instructive as any literal lesson in taste. The festival continues with storytelling. A shepherd recounts the day's mishaps: fallen trellises, trampled grapes, goat interference, and even the mysterious vine that seemed to grow of its own accord. Dionysus listens intently, nodding, adding commentary that ranges from dramatic exaggeration to pointed advice. You notice the subtle joy in his eyes as he witnesses the mortals absorbing lessons amidst laughter. There's something profoundly human and divine in this blend of instruction and celebration. As night falls, torches flicker along the vineyard paths, casting dancing shadows across the vines. Dionysus climbs a small rise, raising a cup of wine to the moonlight. "We honor the vine," he proclaims, "the earth, the sweat of mortals, the mischief of satyrs, and the inevitable chaos that binds it all." You feel the words echo in your chest, a gentle reminder that wine, like life, is shaped by forces both deliberate and uncontrollable. Historians still argue whether such ritualized toasts were primarily spiritual exercises or social entertainment, but tonight, the distinction blurs beautifully. The music slows, the laughter softens, and Dionysus finally rests, leaning against a trellis with a satisfied sigh. The vineyard, once chaotic, now hums with a quiet energy, the afterglow of celebration mingling with the soft scent of grapes and earth. You take a final sip from your cup, savoring not just the flavor but the experience, the lessons, the missteps, the humor, and the carefully orchestrated chaos that has transformed a simple vineyard into a place of wonder. By the end of the festival, you feel a strange kinship with both mortals and divinity. You've tripped over roots, tasted nascent wine, dodged goats, and watched a god balance chaos and care with grace, humor, and occasional exasperation. The first harvest celebration is complete, but you already sense that tomorrow will bring more trials, more experimentation, and more of Dionysus' peculiar, ineffable charm. Night has fully descended, leaving the vineyard bathed in silver moonlight that reflects off the glossy grape leaves. You trudge quietly through the rows, brushing dew from your hands, aware of the soft rustle of nocturnal creatures hidden among the vines. Dionysus walks beside you, his robes whispering against the earth, moving with a curious combination of grace and restless energy. He pauses now and then, touching a vine lightly, murmuring encouragement or mild admonishment. You realize that even under the calm of night, the vineyard demands attention, observation, and devotion, and that divinity does not absolve one from the details of care. The mystical methods of Dionysus' viticulture become more evident now. He kneels to prune in dim light, humming a low, melodic chant that seems to vibrate through the soil. Leaves shimmer faintly under the moon, casting elongated shadows across the ground, and you can't help but feel that some unseen energy responds to his actions. Fringe scholars sometimes suggest that these nocturnal rituals were symbolic gestures intended to encourage growth through intention, song, and attention, while others argue that they reflect an early understanding of microclimates and nighttime effects on plant development. Watching Dionysus, it's impossible to distinguish the practical from the poetic. They are entirely inseparable. You follow him to a cluster of particularly stubborn vines, twisted in impossible directions. He waves his hands, and the air seems to pulse with intent, the leaves quivering as if aware of divine inspection. He leans close, whispering words that are barely audible, and then stands abruptly, taking a deep breath. Patience, he says, voice low and resonant, is the true ferment of all things. You pause to consider the metaphor, recognizing the wisdom beneath the theatrical flourish. This vineyard, chaotic, lively, and unpredictable, teaches not only viticulture but a broader patience, an appreciation for life's slow, deliberate transformations. A sudden rustle catches your attention. A satyr, emboldened by darkness, tiptoes along a trellis, attempting to align leaves and grape clusters according to some personal sense of symmetry. Dionysus turns, sighs, and mutters, even in the dark, order tempts mischief. The scene is oddly endearing, a god, a mischievous creature, and the eternal tension between structure and chaos. You note the parallels with human endeavors, work, play, and unexpected interference all dancing together in delicate balance. Historians still debate whether mythic narratives like these were prescriptive, educational, or purely entertaining, but here in the moonlit vineyard, the lessons feel immediate and visceral. You trudge over soft earth to a low terrace, where the first grapes of the season hang heavy and fragrant. Dionysus kneels, plucking a cluster and rolling it between his fingers. He tastes one, eyes closed, and a subtle smile spreads across his face. Promise, he murmurs, and you feel the weight of that word, not just in the potential sweetness of the fruit but in the labor, care, and chaos that produced it. Fringe texts hint that such tactile engagement with the vines was considered sacred, a way to commune with the earth and its spirits, though scholars continue to debate the literal versus symbolic aspects of this practice. Suddenly, a small flood of playful energy sweeps through the vineyard as a goat wanders near, nudging vines and scattering leaves. Dionysus laughs softly, the sound blending with the night's quiet music. Even chaos has its charm, he remarks, bending to coax a wayward vine back into place. You watch the delicate dance of order and disorder, divine intervention and natural whimsy, and realize that this is the heart of Dionysus' vineyard, a space where mistakes, play, and meticulous care coexist, producing not just grapes but a living story of engagement, attention, and delight. The night grows colder, dew settling on leaves and soil alike. Dionysus finally leans against a sturdy trellis, surveying the vineyard with a contented sigh. You trudge over to join him, your feet soft with mud, hands sticky with grape residue. He gestures broadly at the rows, murmuring, "Every misstep, every curious creature, every tender touch, this is the vineyard's soul." You nod, feeling a quiet reverence for the mixture of chaos, patience, and divine oversight. Gradually, the energy of the day and night softens. You sit together on a low slope, tasting a small cluster of grapes straight from the vine. The flavors are simple, wild, and sweet, carrying with them the memory of toil, laughter, and mischief. Dionysus leans back, arms behind his head, and sighs in satisfaction. "The harvest," he murmurs, "is as much about the heart as the fruit." You smile, realizing that his wisdom, theatrical though it may be, touches something universal, that creation, care, and enjoyment are inseparable, even or especially when guided by a god. The vineyard is quiet now, illuminated only by moonlight and the soft glow of distant fireflies. You feel the gentle rhythm of the earth beneath you, the lingering scent of grapes and soil, and a profound calm settling over your senses. Dionysus closes his eyes briefly, whispering to the vines one last time before resting. You reflect on the day's lessons: patience, observation, humor, chaos, and the subtle artistry of attending to life's details. As you sit in the soft night, the vineyard breathing around you, the lesson is clear: divinity does not exempt one from effort, it amplifies awareness, responsibility, and wonder. Every leaf, grape, and misstep matters, and within this interplay lies the soul of the vineyard and perhaps the soul of life itself. The night deepens, and the vineyard seems to exhale, the air cool and heavy with the scent of earth, dew, and grapes that have borne the sun's warmth all day. You sit quietly on the soft soil, the moon casting gentle silver light across leaves and twisted vines, each shadow moving slowly as though the vineyard itself is breathing. Dionysus leans back against a trellis, eyes half closed, a faint smile on his lips, and you notice the tension of the day: the pruning, the goat mischief, the rogue grape avalanches finally softening into a gentle rhythm of calm. Your hands are sticky with grape juice, your clothes dusted with soil, yet the discomfort is oddly comforting. You realize that the mess, the labor, and even the chaos are inseparable from the sweetness of the experience. The night air carries distant sounds, a soft murmur of insects, the occasional bleat of a nocturnal goat, the whisper of wind through leaves. Each sound is a reminder that the vineyard lives beyond the day's frantic efforts, that life continues with or without your attention, yet thrives more beautifully when attended to with care and curiosity. Dionysus murmurs softly to the vines, his voice low and melodic, as if offering gratitude for their endurance and promise. You sit back, letting the events of the past hours wash over you: the lessons in patience, observation, humor, and chaos, and the strange intimacy that comes from sharing labor and celebration with both mortals and a god. Fringe scholars suggest that such nocturnal rituals may have been both spiritual and educational, teaching attentiveness, respect, and subtle artistry, while historians still debate the literal versus symbolic significance. In this moment, the distinction feels irrelevant, the feeling is what matters. You take a slow, deep breath, savoring the cool night air mingled with the sweet perfume of grapes. The vineyard stretches before you, a labyrinth of dark leaves, gleaming fruit, and faintly twinkling fireflies, quiet yet alive. The distant hills are soft silhouettes, cradling the vineyard in gentle embrace. You realize that this space, nurtured by care, chaos, and divine oversight, embodies a delicate equilibrium between attention and surrender, labor and celebration, order and playful mischief. As the final whispers of night settle, Dionysus closes his eyes, resting at last. You feel the soft pulse of the vineyard beneath your fingertips, the lingering warmth of the day fading into calm. And as you lean back on the gentle slope, gazing at the stars glimmering through leaves, you understand a profound truth: the vineyard, like life, thrives in the intersection of care, chaos, patience, and wonder. Every misstep, every laugh, every curious creature contributes to the soul of the place. With that realization, your body relaxes, your mind unwinds, and the vineyard, luminous under the soft glow of moonlight, becomes a lullaby of earth, grape, and gentle divinity. The chaos has faded, leaving a serene rhythm, a quiet testament to the artistry of tending, watching, and participating in something larger than yourself. You close your eyes, letting the night carry you into a slow, peaceful drift.